Good morning, friends, and welcome to the grist mill. My name's Chris, and I'm the guy in charge. This is day 16 of our virtual field trips, and today's topic is all about Keremeos Creek. Keremeos Creek runs through the middle of our property and is the whole reason that our water wheel powered flour mill is even here. This creek provides the water source to turn the wheel that does all the work to make flour. And Barrington Price, when he came here in 1877, thought really long and hard about where the best place would be. There's a whole bunch of reasons that this property is pretty much just perfect for putting a mill. Now, the creek has all sorts of importance, and we're going to talk about that for the next little bit. But I stopped here on one of our bridges just to admire the creek right now because it's just starting to come up. Over the last 24 hours or so, we've had a lot of rain, enough rain that I wasn't able to get everything ready to actually make the water wheel turn today, which was the original plan. Instead, we're going to admire the creek and its power and its importance to this piece of property and to the surrounding area. Now, I can see the creek. It's right there, and it's behind me, but you can't. So why don't we move the camera a little bit here, and you can get a sense of what I'm looking at. Oh, wrong direction. Let's fix that, shall we? How do we? There we go. There we go. So beautiful Keremeos Creek. Now the creek actually starts off up in the mountains. There's a ski hill behind Penticton called Apex Mountain, and that's the headwaters of this particular creek here. The meltwater, as the snow is melting, comes down Keremeos Creek, down through a valley until it gets to us, and then continues on past us to the Similkameen River. After the Similkameen River continues south, it joins up with the Okanagan River, which joins up with the Columbia River, and eventually ends up going all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So this water has a very, very long route ahead of it before it gets all the way down to the ocean. Now, let's go for a little walk, shall we? So for those of you just joining us, we're talking today about Keremeos Creek, which is this creek right behind me. It's the creek that runs right through the middle of the gristmill property. So, the whole reason that Barrington Price picked this particular piece of property was because it actually has a fairly steep incline to it. From the west side of the property to the east side as the creek flows, it's got a bit of a drop, and it's the drop in water that the mill actually uses to create its power. You see, we don't use the movement of the water because the movement of the water changes all the time. In times like this, when flooding is going to be starting soon, the spring freshet we call it, the water's moving really, really quickly. At other times of the year, the water moves pretty slowly. So to make sure that you have a reliable source of power, instead, what Barrington did is created a little reservoir further upstream, where it's higher up in elevation as well. And then that would feed something, excuse me, I'm walking too fast. That feeds the water wheel through the wooden trough that you see up high there. Now, there's a little dam on the end of that, on the end of the flume there. And we can control it from inside the mill to control how much water passes through and hits the water wheel. Now, the water wheel's covered in buckets, as you can see. And as the water fills those buckets, it makes one side heavy, but not the other side. So that side wants to go down. Meanwhile, when it gets to the bottom, it dumps out all that water and then goes back up and gets more. So hopefully in a couple of days, when we can make sure everything's in good shape, I'll be able to open up that dam right at the end of the flume there and drop water onto our wheel. Now, the funny thing about our mill, one of the things that's sort of ironic about it, is that water wheel is really the iconic part of the building. The rest of the building doesn't look particularly interesting, unless you're a big fan of log construction. But it's a pretty plain-looking building. The funny thing, though, is it's that plain-looking building that's the old part. That part of the building was built 143 years ago. The water wheel was actually only built 3 years ago. They have to be replaced all the time. Even though it's the iconic part, it's the part that we replace. because water and wood don't last a long time together no matter what you do. We don't want to put harsh preservatives or chemicals on it. Instead, we just build another one when it's time. So, about 4 seasons ago, our water wheel actually collapsed on us, which was a bit of a surprise. And so we dismantled it and we built a new one using rough sawn timber and following as closely as we could the design of the original. Well, the earlier originals. The original disappeared a long time ago in a flood. Now, speaking of floods, that's something that does happen on Keremeos Creek fairly often. Every year there's a surge of water that comes down from Apex Mountain and other places. And so during that spring freshet, as we call it, the water can get fairly high. In fact, as I come over here to one of our other bridges to show you, let me just put this down. Okay. And we'll turn the camera around. So here is the creek way upstream from where we were before. And you can see the bridge that goes into the mill right there. And the water surging underneath. Now what you might notice is there is a rock retaining wall there. That rock retaining wall obviously is helping keep the creek from cutting under the mill, which is pretty important. Well, 2 years ago we had a pretty incredible flood season. And in fact, we put sandbags on top of that retaining wall to a height of about 2 feet to make sure that the water didn't end up damaging the mill. It was quite an unusual flood year. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case this year. In fact, our snowpack for the area is only about 10% above normal. So we should, if everything cooperates, have a fairly normal season this year in terms of flooding. The water will get quite high. It'll make us a little bit nervous, but it won't cause any problems. Now, when we're looking down at this water, one thing that I notice right away is that it's getting cloudy. That's a good sign that the creek is being active, that the water level is coming up. Because as the water level comes up and has more energy, it starts to cut. It starts to cut into the dirt higher upstream and carries that down. And so when the water goes from crystal clear, like it is when it's nice and calm and lazy, to cloudy like this, it's a really good sign that flooding is happening. The water level is coming up. Hopefully, it won't come up too high, as I said before. Now, this little stretch of creek that we have running through our property is very important and special to us, partly because it is one of the few places on this creek where we still have an intact stand of cottonwood trees. Cottonwood trees used to grow all along this creek, and they're very important for both wildlife and the fish in the creek. And there are fish in here. I've seen both rainbow and brook trout get fished out of this creek not so long ago. Even it was only a foot deep, I've seen somebody pull out a rainbow trout that was almost a foot long. Pretty amazing. Now, the importance of these cottonwoods is that they provide a lot of shade to the water, keeping the water cool, and fish don't like warm water. It's harder for them to breathe in it. And so they like the cool water in the shade of the trees. The trees serve another important purpose too, which is to help protect against flooding, because they're holding on to the banks, and they're holding on to them pretty darn strong with their roots. And so as the water floods down, those cottonwood trees on either side help keep the creek contained. Now, in lots of places, they have problems with flooding because, well, they actually pulled those trees out, the roots disappear, and suddenly the creek is free to dig and move wherever it wants to go. And that creates all sorts of problems. Now, we see a lot of interesting bird species along the creek sometimes. We see birds like great blue herons. We see ducks in the creek sometimes. We see screech owls, all sorts of animals. There are also lots of bats living around here that come out in the late evening, all thanks to these trees. There's deer that come and visit, and there's even, because we are in the desert, we actually have rattlesnakes that come down from the dry hillside and come down to get a little bit of water before they disappear again. It's not often that we see them, but we do see them every once in a while. It's kind of neat. So, to take another look from here, you can see the flume there, nice and high. Now, it seems really high, but the truth is, that's the height of the water only about a quarter mile upstream. And So that would be the natural level of the water, and just keeping it horizontal all the way till it hits the water wheel, drops on it, and then after the mill, just a little further downstream, that water goes back into the creek. We only borrow it for a little while. We don't use it permanently. So that's a little bit about Keremeos Creek. And like I said, we do want to get the water wheel turning. We're just not sure how quickly we're going to be able to do that. The rain made things kind of mucky yesterday and soggy, so it's not something that we're going to do quick. But if you have any questions about the creek or about its role with the mill or its property, please feel free to leave a comment in the comments of this video. Also, please share this video with somebody else. Let them know that we're doing these every single day. It's nice to be able to have you here. And lastly, if you haven't done so yet, we'd really appreciate if you would consider buying a season's pass to the site. We have some other things that we're going to announce in the next 2 days. Other ways that you can help support us and maybe even get something for yourself at the same time. But if you're able, we would love for you to be able to buy a pass to the site. If you can't use it this year, because we're not open enough, we'll let you use it next year. But more importantly, it gives us the revenue to keep these things going. And let me tell you, when we get all the way out to the mill here, we don't have a lot of Wi-Fi reception, and cell data is not cheap. So anyways, thank you so much for visiting us today on our virtual field trip on day 16, and we will see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.